Madame Bik raconte n'importe quoi. Ce qu'elle raconte n'a pas de sens. C'est de la haine personnelle. Il y a une fille qui me traque, là, une chasseuse de tête, depuis que je suis célèbre. Il y a une cinglée là, qui fouille les 3500 publications que j'ai faites pour savoir si je ne me suis pas trompé. Mais est-ce que tout le monde est devenu fou? C'est moi qui suis fou. Les gens sont dingues.
Bonjour tout le monde. Elisabeth Bik est née aux Pays-Bas. À l'université d'Utrecht, elle obtient un doctorat en biologie pour ses recherches sur le développement de vaccins contre de nouvelles souches de vibrio cholerae impliquées dans des épidémies de choléra en Inde et au Bangladesh. Elle s'installe en Californie pour travailler à l'université de Stanford, notamment sur les microbiomes humains, c'est-à-dire les micro-organismes qui vivent dans et sur notre corps. En 2014, elle crée le blog Microbiome Digest qui commente les dernières publications scientifiques en microbiologie. De 2016 à 2018, elle travaille comme directrice scientifique pour la start-up Ubiome, spécialisée dans le séquençage du microbiome humain. Quelques mois après son départ, l'entreprise est poursuivie pour des questions de surfacturation et de vente forcée. Madame Bik n'est pas mise en cause dans l'affaire. À partir de 2019, elle se consacre entièrement à ses recherches sur les fraudes photographiques et à l'analyse de l'intégrité de papiers scientifiques. Je cite Wikipédia. Entre mars 2020 et mars 2021, Elisabeth Bik publie 60 commentaires sur 60 articles signés par Didier Raoult. Ces commentaires concernent de possibles oublis de déclarations de conflit d'intérêts, 10 articles, des anomalies avec les images, par exemple des images identiques dans des expériences différentes, plus de 20 articles, et des questions d'éthique concernant des recherches impliquant la personne humaine, plus de la moitié des articles. Un an plus tard, l'un des articles a été rétracté, l'un a fait l'objet d'une correction et deux autres sont encore en cours d'enquête. C'est au sujet de cette confrontation publique avec Didier Raoult que j'ai souhaité m'entretenir avec Elisabeth Bik. Voici l'interview. So, Dr Bik.
Cher Dr Bik, merci beaucoup d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Commençons directement avec l'affaire qui vous oppose à Didier Raoult. Où en est la plainte qu'il a déposée? De quoi vous accuse-t-il?
He accuses me of three things: of harcèlement, which I think is intimidation or harassment, of blackmailing and extortion.
C'est quand même très sérieux.
That's very serious, yes.
Lui avez-vous réellement demandé de l'argent?
So I think the extortion and the blackmailing are based on two tweets. In one tweet, I asked Biais, a professor who's working for Raoult, I asked him to support my Patreon account because he was repeatedly asking me, who is paying you, who is paying you? I'm like, oh, here's my Patreon account. So that's an account where people can donate $1 or $5 a month to support my work. And so it was sort of meant as a joke. I had not expected him to really support my work, but and it's also not really blackmailing because I didn't ask him, you know, give me money or else I'll do something else. And then there was another tweet in which I said, I'm a consultant, and so one way that I make my money is by searching for papers that other people have written, and happy to do yours as long as you pay me for it. So, you know, basically offering my work as a consultant, and maybe he misinterpreted that. I don't think his English is very good. So maybe he interpreted that as a attempt to extortion.
Extorsion sur Twitter au vu de tous.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that tweet is still there. I didn't delete it. It's in plain view. Everybody can see it. And judge it for what it is not, which it's not extortion, but
yes, I think
that's his claim.
It's amazing. Et la partie qui concerne le harcèlement, sur quoi repose-t-elle?
So the harassment claim, I believe, is based on the fact that I've posted about 60 papers from Didier Raoult's lab on Papier, and every time I post something there, the corresponding author or any other authors that you add on will get an email. So every time I post something there, Didier Raoult and some of his other co-authors got an email from me. So because I posted 60 papers, they probably got 60 emails from Papier saying, hey, Elisabeth Bik posted a comment about your paper. Is that harassment? I don't know. My email box is full of emails I don't necessarily want, but he could also respond to them, and he didn't.
And so, in general, selon vous, quelle est la réaction normale d'un scientifique quand on remet en cause la sincérité de ses publications? Comment peut-il se défendre?
So a scientist could respond to allegations on Papier by, for example, showing the original blots or showing that they did indeed got permission to do research on human subjects. So if I raise concerns about ethical approval or about image duplication or what else, they could prove me wrong. They could say, no, you're wrong. Here's the raw data. Here's what we did. And I'd be happy to be proved wrong. But the other option is to not respond. That's not fine in my opinion, but it's disappointing. But instead, Raoult chose to threaten me with a lawsuit. He never responded to any of these comments on Papier.
Est-ce la première fois qu'un chercheur réagit de cette manière?
Yes, it is. It was the first time that an author, instead of replying on Papier or in any other scientific arena, decided to take it immediately to the legal arena and threaten me with a lawsuit.
Pourtant, il prétend avoir des réponses. Il a montré un dossier de 200 pages à l'écran sur sa chaîne YouTube. Puisqu'il a ces réponses, est-il obligé de vous les fournir?
No, he's not. I mean, it would be a professional thing to do. If one scientist raises concern about the work of another scientist, we would expect that scientist to reply to me then, and not just have a file and hand that over to justice. Like, that seems a strange thing. If he has answers, why doesn't he answer me? I was the one who asked the question. Instead, he said he made this big file. I have no idea what's in that. It looked actually like a lot of empty pages, but he handed it over to justice, and who knows what's in there.
Yeah. So, pour revenir au début, pour quelle raison vous êtes-vous intéressé au travail de Didier Raoult? Il dit que c'est sa célébrité qui vous inciterait à chercher un peu de lumière. C'est cela votre motivation?
No, I'm actually interested in any scientist or any scientific paper that has a concern in it after publication. So I've raised over 4,000 concerns on Papier. And so I'm not particularly focusing on one scientist or another scientist, or I'm not focusing on one particular country or one particular field. Any scientist who I've heard that, there might be concern in their paper, I'm interested in them for a short term. I'll look at all of their papers and then I'll move on to the next scientist. So Didier Raoult is just one of the many scientists whose work I've questioned. And I have focused on him for a little while, but not. It's not the primary focus of all my work. I've reported works of many other scientists.
Mais il est celui qui dit de vous que vous êtes une cinglée, une fille qui le traque. Il a une manière assez marquante de formuler son avis sur votre démarche. Avez-vous répondu?
Did you respond to that?
I did not respond to that. I mean, I can understand that he's frustrated and angry and calls me unpleasant names. That's totally up to him. Like, I'm sympathetic for his response. He can call me whatever he wants. That's fine. I try to keep it polite. I'm not calling him names. I'm not making fun of the way he looks or the way, the words he chooses. I try to keep it professional. If he chooses to respond with trying to discredit me by calling me names, that's up to him. I don't think that's a very professional response, but you know, he's free to do that. I'm not going to sue him for that or so. He can call me whatever he wants.
Hier sur Twitter, le 22 juin, il a publié la déclaration suivante. Les accusations de fraude dont je suis l'objet sur Publier relèvent de la diffamation. Dans ma carrière, un seul de mes 3500 articles a été rétracté. Article pour lequel je n'avais de responsabilité ni dans la conduite des expériences, ni dans la rédaction. Et cette réponse est très embarrassante parce qu'elle est en elle-même un problème.
It's a problem. It's just maybe one paper in 3,500 papers that he published. But if he says, oh, I was not responsible for this paper, I was not responsible for the experiments or the editing of the paper, then why is he an author? Because you need to have had some involvement with a paper to be an author on it. So that's just one paper. But if he has published 3,500 papers, which is an incredible amount, like no other scientist that I know of has published so many papers. And it just seems impossible to have so many papers published. I think it's 2 a week or so. Somebody calculated that. So maybe, as I asked him on Twitter, maybe he was not responsible for some of these other papers as well. Is he just putting his name on any paper that leaves his institution? That would not be a good thing, because there are strict rules for scientific authorship. And we all, you know, bend the rules sometimes maybe, but it seems that he puts his name on a lot of papers, and you cannot just put your name and then say, oh, I wasn't responsible for it. No, if you put your name on a paper, especially if you're a senior author, that means you hold the end responsibility for everything in that paper. And so with great power comes great responsibility. If you want to put your name on a paper, you will also need to bear the responsibility. So if a paper gets retracted, you have to own that. And it might not have been your fault, but you have to be responsible. And you have to say, yes, I guess we all made a mistake here. It needs to be retracted. And also, yeah, he claims that only one paper got retracted, but many of these concerns were raised in the past year. And it takes, in my experience, multiple years, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years for a paper to get retracted. That's just a very long process. So he's not out of the woods yet.
Est-ce une violation des règles sur la paternité des écrits scientifiques? Est-ce une forme de fraude? Comment définit-on la fraude en sciences?
In the US, there are definitions of science misconduct, not necessarily fraud. So that word usually is not used. But author misconduct is not one of the 3 pillars of scientific misconduct, which are plagiarism, falsification, and fabrication. So putting your name on a paper that you weren't really a part of is not necessarily science misconduct, but it's not good either. It's and it's not always clear. I said there are clear rules, but you can interpret them in multiple ways. And so I think most scientists will have papers that they weren't really part of the real investigation, but they usually, when your name is put, that means you at least had a role in editing the paper, reading through everything, giving feedback, like maybe, you know, change the order here or change the wording there or add another experiment. And so most scientists who are on a paper will have had a chance to read the paper and give feedback. And it appears that in this case, he was not.
Je ne suis pas certain qu'il ait bien lu tout ce qu'il a signé, car en plus de tous ses travaux, il a publié des livres. Et je me suis laissé dire que cela prend du temps d'écrire des livres. J'ai une question sur un article en particulier, je ne sais pas si vous l'avez lu. Il est signé par Roussel et Raoult, son titre « Influence des conflits d'intérêts sur les positions publiques dans l'ère de la Covid-19, le cas de Gilead Sciences ». Ils disent, dans ce papier, nos résultats montrent une corrélation, coefficient de corrélation de 1, stupéfiant, entre les sommes perçues de la part de l'entreprise Gilead Sciences et l'opposition publique à l'utilisation de l'hydroxychloroquine en France. En clair, ils accusent ou ils insinuent que d'autres chercheurs sont corrompus. Pensez-vous qu'un tel article est une chose normale, habituelle?
No, and I have not read the paper, but I think it appears to fit in a tendency of him publishing papers that are not very well peer-reviewed and that are more opinionated, but not always good science. And I think most people who are concerned about the Didier Raoult hydroxychloroquine papers are not concerned about hydroxychloroquine itself. Like I would have loved if hydroxychloroquine worked, but we're concerned about the methodology of the paper itself. So we're not concerned about hydroxychloroquine. Maybe it works, maybe not. By now, I think there have been enough papers proving that it does not seem to work well. But we were not anti-hydroxychloroquine. I'm not anti the company who makes it. I'm anti-bad science papers. And so I think he immediately assumed that if a person is against his paper, we're against hydroxychloroquine, and that's not the case. It's a very black and white view, and it's much more nuanced than he is trying to convince other people of.
Les auteurs de ce papier, Yanis Roussel et Didier Raoult, n'ont jamais répondu à des chercheurs qui leur demandent leurs données pour vérifier comment ils parviennent à leurs conclusions. Est-ce habituel que des chercheurs choisissent d'ignorer une demande légitime de montrer leurs données?
I think Raoult, in many cases, does not seem to have a good answer to legitimate questions that people ask him. If you dare to disagree with his opinion, he appears to immediately resort to legal threats or to insult people. He never seems to have a good answer, and I think that means he does not have any answers. And I think it fits in his his inability to have a professional discussion with other scientists. He immediately resorts to harassing and bullying, and that's not how a professor with a large body of work and lots of medals and everything, that's not how you expect somebody to respond. I would have hoped he had better responses. So he has a very black and white view of science, and I think science is so much more nuanced. There's so many room for different opinion, and usually scientists will have discussions, and these discussions can be very fierce, but usually the answer is somewhere in the middle, and I feel he's like holding his ground and not ready for other opinions anymore, and that's sad. And I wish that was different.
Dans cette affaire, avez-vous reçu des manifestations de soutien de la part d'institutions françaises?
Help, support from administration from France, CNRS, ministry.
Yes. Yeah. So I've had the CNRS and the École Normale.
UNS. Yes.
Yes. So I had some bodies, some organizations support me, and there have also been 2 petitions that have received lots of support, where thousands of people have signed, in support of me, and that has been incredibly important for me, like sticking to my opinion and not being intimidated by these legal threats, because there are people supporting me. I'm not alone in this fight. There's hundreds and thousands of other people, and even now official instances, who are supporting the work I do, and hopefully see that I'm just trying to raise questions. I'm not trying to insult or intimidate anyone. I'm trying to be as professional as I can be and not be discouraged by all these harassment that I'm currently facing online, which appear to be very coordinated. These are coordinated attacks, trying to rip all my papers apart, trying to change my Wikipedia entry. There's a lot of trolls trying to discredit me, but I try to keep on going and doing what I do. And these supports by these organizations and individuals are extremely important for me to keep on doing what I'm doing.
Parlons un peu de votre travail et des raisons pour lesquelles vous l'avez choisi. En quoi consiste le job? Pour qui travaillez-vous?
Who do you work for?
Who do I work for? I work for myself, and I'm like my most strict boss, the most horrible boss I've ever had, because I yeah, I motivate myself, and I currently do not work for anybody else. Occasionally, as a consultant, I will work for an institution. So those are my clients, institutions and publishers who will ask me to help with individual cases. So there might be another scientist who has been accused, maybe on papier, of, let's say, image duplication or maybe even photoshopping. And then publisher or institutions are investigating these cases, and they'll ask me for my help as an expert opinion. And I will obviously not take on any cases that I've worked on myself. So if I've posted something on papier and then a university asked me to investigate this case, I'm like, well, I've already posted this on papier. I cannot take on this case because I'm not, I'm already biased. I would agree with myself. But I'm asked to work for these institutions or publishers to investigate other cases. So these are like sort of contract basis where I'll get a small amount of work. We agree on a price, and then I'll do the work for them, send them a report, and then that's over. So I'm not connected to one particular organization. This is contract-based work.
Comment êtes-vous arrivé à cette spécialisation, à cette expertise de la fraude?
So I've worked many years as a microbiologist. I worked 15 years at Stanford, and I've worked 2 years in industry. And I took this looking at duplicated images on as a hobby. So I did it sort of at night, in the weekends. But over the years, I realized I've gotten very, like a lot of good findings, and I got more experience, and I started to become a little bit better in it. And so after a while, I realized I was actually more enthusiastic about my work looking at image duplications than about my real work, my paid job. And so I quit my job and am now doing this full time. So I basically made my hobby into my consultancy job.
Existe-t-il un cursus de formation, un diplôme dans ce domaine?
Oh, that's a great question. No, that doesn't exist. But like normally when you have a PhD, there are so many fields you can choose, to continue in. Like if you have a PhD in microbiology, you could continue to become a science writer or science journalist, or you could become active in publishing, become maybe a patent lawyer. So you don't have to have a particular background or not. You don't even have to have a PhD in microbiology to do the work I'm doing. You just have to have a good sense of like patterns, recognizing patterns, and have some experience in not falsely accusing people. So some people who do this work actually do not have a science background at all. They might have a background in something very different, but they have the same talent of spotting these duplications. And so I hope this will turn into a new field, but you also have to have some talent to spot these, because some people just cannot see the duplications that I can seem to see.
Vous n'êtes pas la seule à faire ce métier. Combien de gens l'exercent dans le monde?
I know about, I would say, 10 other people who do this work systematically, but I'm trying to train a lot of people on Twitter. So I post these sort of puzzles of, can you spot the duplications here? And I think by now I've secretly trained a lot of other people to do this work. And I'm getting more and more direct messages where people say, oh, I was reviewing a paper and I recognized the duplication. I send it back to the editor. And thank you, because you trained me in recognizing these things. So I think by now a lot of people, maybe hundreds of other people are trying to pick this up. But I'm not quite sure if they do it systematically or just recognize these things when they are reviewing papers themselves.
Vous travaillez de manière indépendante, mais vous collaborez aussi avec Papier. Comment tout cela fonctionne-t-il?
So Papier is a site where people can comment on scientific papers. And it basically is a website where you can search for papers, you can search for authors to see if other people have left comments. And those comments can vary from, hey, great paper, I really love this, to I have a concern about figure 3a. It looks like there's a duplication going on here. So I think most of the posts are about image problems because they're so visible and people recognize them, and yeah, you can just easily see it and mark it. But there are also comments on problems maybe with ethical approval, or with animal ethics, like large tumors. We've seen papers that, like with plagiarized text. So it could be all kinds of problems about papers. And I am using this platform to post my concerns, because it's a very fast way to alert other readers that there might be a problem with a paper, and they should not rely on the results too much. Because I'm frustrated with the lack of responses from journals and institutions in addressing the concerns I've raised in the past. So for example, there's a data set of 800 papers that I found to have duplications in, and I reported all of these to the editors, and it took, most of these are still not addressed, like 58% or so. After 6 years of, after I've reported them, these papers are not yet corrected or retracted. So people might just look at these papers and think they're real, and they base their own results, their own new research on. So I try to alert people by posting to Papier as a very fast way to say there might be a problem with this paper. Hey, pay attention. So yeah, at Papier, I'm not connected to Papier. I'm a Papier user, but there's other users, lots of other users as well, that post papers there.
On a parlé de la manière de choisir les papiers à analyser, mais quels sont les points qui attirent immédiatement votre attention, qui vous font dire « il y a anguille sous roche ».
So I'm still following up on a lot of leads. Either people send me papers that they think might have a problem, or I work from papers that I've previously identified. So I have a spreadsheet of 5,000 papers. So every paper that has been published, I could check the other authors and see if there were other papers published by these same authors that might also have problems. So I have lots of leads to follow. It's almost like detective work, where you have a suspicion and you sort of follow that, and then you might have a lot of dead ends, but then you have another lead that you can follow, and maybe that has some results. So I'm getting lots of tips. I will scan these images. That usually just takes me seconds or sometimes minutes, depending on the complexity of the paper. And then if it's a tip that somebody sends me per email, I will let them know, like, I think there's no problem here, or I think, yes, there is a problem. I'm going to post this on Papier. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. So I get way more requests to look at papers than I could ever follow up on. And so there's no lack of leads for me to follow. And yeah, a lot of these will lead to interesting cases.
So you
Votre spécialité est de repérer les duplications d'images dans les articles. Mais il y a aussi des problèmes avec des images originales, non dupliquées et pourtant frauduleuses. Comment les repérer?
How can we spot them?
I mean, I'm mainly looking for duplications either within an image, within a photo, or between photos. So, and these duplications can vary from just the same paper, the same photo, published twice. So figure 2A is exactly the same photo as figure 3B. That could just be an honest error. There could also be a rotation where the other photo is rotated, or it's overlapping, or it's even like mirrored, or so those are images where it's more likely that it was not an honest error. And then there are images that have duplications within the photo. So basically stamping, where you have like the same cell visible 5 or 6 times. And so those are very likely to have been done with the intention to mislead the reader. So I'm looking for all of these types of duplications, and I'll mark in my spreadsheet if it was, type 1, type 2, or type 3. And that helps me also decide what I would recommend, for example, for an editor. Should they retract the paper? And I usually will say, well, when it's a type 3 duplication, yes, that's that's photoshopping. That's an intention to mislead. Yeah, so it could be all kinds of problems. I've even spotted duplicated parts within a spectrum or another line graph, where you have like a lot of noise, and you just see that the noise is repeated a couple of times. That seems very unlikely. So I've also found a couple of those cases.
That's for pictures?
Très bien, ça c'est pour les images. Mais il y a toutes sortes de données que les gens peuvent inventer, fabriquer, etc. Existe-t-il des outils pour vérifier dans les données si tout est authentique ou factice?
Well, if it's fraudulent data in any other type of figure, any other type of data than a figure, then it's very hard to detect. So the human eye brain combination can detect these problems in photos pretty easily. But if somebody really changes numbers in a table or a line graph, it's much, much harder to detect. So those things are really hard. I sometimes might catch them, but only if they make really dumb errors. If people are smart, you can change the data to make it look real. Now, there are tools that you can use, for example, to look at data in a table to see if it's sort of has a sort of random natural distribution that you would expect in biology. And because when people tend to make up numbers, they might actually pick the number 3 more times than the number 4. And so you would expect every last digit to be present equal in sort of equal ratios. And you might detect if somebody changed some of the data and made up data, fabricated data, that sometimes these numbers are not randomly distributed. But there are all kinds of assays that actually will always produce numbers that end in a particular number. So it's hard to interpret these results, but there are some tools that could help a person do detective work on numbers as opposed to photos. But photos, it's more like an immediate recognition, while numbers, trying to detect fraud in numbers is very cumbersome, will take a long time to look at a paper and trying to dissect it. So there are some tools, but it's much harder to detect.
Lorsqu'on fait de la science, on part du principe que les confrères sont honnêtes et qu'ils n'inventent pas leurs données. Mais on ne peut pas en être sûr à 100%. À votre avis, quelle est la place de la corruption dans le monde scientifique? Les grandes industries incitent-elles, produisent-elles de la fraude plus que les petits labos?
So yeah, I sort of see 2 types of science fraud. So one is the individual scientist who tries to get papers published by doing fraud, and it could also be honest errors and everything in between. But there is also sort of organized fraud in science going on, which we can see with what we call paper mills, which are companies that produce fake papers. And this is a particular problem in papers from China, because there's a very specific requirement in China that if you're a medical doctor and you want to sort of finish medical school and get a position in a hospital, then you need to have a paper published. And this is an impossible requirement because these are medical doctors. They work long shifts. They don't have time to do research, and they're not offered time to do research. And they might not even work in an institution that they could do research in. So when you have to publish a science paper, but you're not given time off to do science, then you are faced with an impossible situation. And so these people buy papers, buy authorships on papers that are being produced by these paper mill companies. And we believe these papers are mostly fake. There are sometimes real photos in them, but they might not really represent what the paper thinks. And they're written by ghostwriters who basically write the same paper over and over again, but change enough of the text to make it fly under the plagiarism detector. And just insert some random graphs that are probably fabricated, just completely made up. And so these are organized institutions that produce these fake papers, and they willingly sell them to the authors who need them. And those papers are a big pollution in certain scientific fields, because they're completely made up. And you would not really know it by just looking at one individual paper. But when you look at hundreds of them, you start to recognize they're all following the same template. And so it's really hard to detect. But I was part of a group of people that have detected several of these papers, and there's hundreds actually now being retracted. But they're hard to detect. And so I'm worried that a lot of scientific fields might be starting to be infiltrated by these paper mills.
Les gens sont très inquiets à propos de Big Pharma, du fait que les industries peuvent passer commande de résultats scientifiques dont elles ont besoin. Avez-vous observé un tel phénomène?
Well, I've worked in industry myself, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong as when a company does scientific research. I think that's encouraged, and I think we should not just leave science research to academics, because sometimes there are things that are very applicable for medicine or other fields in science where it makes sense to have a company investigate these and make a useful product. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with it, as long as you disclose all your connections and you know who has the patents and who works at these companies. So, and I also think that in current drug development, there's so many eyes on companies there that sometimes these papers can be there's even less chance of a fraud than in papers that are being published by academic institutions who might be very protective sometimes of their data and not willing to share with other people. While some pharmaceutical companies just know what's at stake, and so they know if they're being caught in fraudulent research, they're going to lose their product and they're going to have to shut down. And so I feel it's not necessarily true that pharmaceutical companies are publishing fraudulent papers more than academics. I feel fraud is everywhere probably, but doesn't necessarily connect to one of these two types of research institutions.
Okay.
Mais d'un autre côté, quelle est la part de responsabilité des éditeurs, Elsevier, Springer, concernant les défaillances dans la peer review et dans l'apparente absence de réaction, correction, voire rétractation des articles erronés, frauduleux?
So I wish that publishers would take more responsibility. So once a paper has been published, it went through peer review, it got, seen by an editor, it got published. That doesn't necessarily mean that the paper is completely free of concerns. So if other people find concerns in these papers, the publishers should still have responsibility to care for their product even after they have published it. So I compare it to when you buy a car at a dealership. The dealership is trying to sell you this shiny new car, and then you drive off, and then around the corner one of the wheels falls off. You would then go back to the dealership and complain, like, you just showed me a shiny car, but one of the wheels is not good. Like, can you fix this? And it seems that publishers are very non-responsive when somebody comes back with a broken article, and they're like, oh no, it's published. We're not helping you anymore. And so it's frustrating to see that publishers don't want to retract these papers or even correct them. Like, just own up to a mistake in coordination with the authors. But think about the readers. Like, the readers are the ones who are reading these papers, are paying for these papers, either as authors or through licenses of their libraries. And so as publishers, you should care about the quality even after this paper has been peer-reviewed.
Comment peut-on les obliger à faire ce travail qui est le leur?
I'm trying to knock on their doors and showing them some papers that have problems, and they are starting to respond. So I do see sort of a slow change in the position that these publishers and individual journals are taking in actually starting to realize that it makes more sense to care about the quality even after publishing than just trying to not respond to these cases, because in the end, a publisher is going to look better if they are retracting papers that are indeed that do indeed contain flawed methods than if they're trying to swipe these things under the rug. And I feel there's a lot of power in social media and sites like Papier where people can discuss papers. And I think journals are now slowly realizing they should respond to these cases. So I do see a change, but it's a very slow process. It's like a slow ship that is, it cannot make a swift turn. It's going to take years for this academic ship, this academic publishing ship to make a change.
So we have to maintain the pressure on them.
Donc nous devons les garder sous pression pour qu'ils persévèrent. J'ai 3 courtes questions qui viennent d'internautes pro-Raoult, des gens qui sur Twitter se fient à lui et pas à vous. Vous avez déjà plus ou moins répondu, mais voici ce qu'il demande. Quelle est votre légitimité pour juger du travail d'autrui? Avez-vous fait des découvertes scientifiques qui vous autorisent à faire ce job?
So I think it's less important who I am, as long as I'm raising questions that are visible from looking at the papers. Like who I am, I don't think should matter much, but I think it matters to some people. Some people find it very important how many papers a scientist has published. I don't think that's the only criteria that you can measure a good scientist with. So I do have a PhD in microbiology. But even if I didn't, I could still raise critical concerns about other people's paper. But I do feel a lot of these questions sort of seem to go back to attempts to try to discredit me. So not to answer the questions about concerns I have about the papers, but immediately deflecting it by trying to shoot the messenger or trying to discredit my reputation. And so all my papers are being torn apart on Twitter. Every little image from papers years ago that I've published are being discussed and discredited. And I guess that's the price I have to pay for raising concerns with other people's papers. I have to be open that my own papers are going to be criticized as well. But in the end, it's about the questions I asked. Don't try to deflect it back by discrediting me. Why don't you answer the questions I've asked? And I feel that is the heart of the issue. And every discredit to my person, to my works, means that there are no real answers to the questions I've asked, that I've raised really good questions and they don't have any answers. So in a way, it tells me that I was right, and I've asked questions where that they cannot answer because there are no answers.
Do not kill the messenger.
Tuer le messager. Didier Raoult dit cela dans une vidéo toute récente. Une autre question revient très souvent pour vous sur les réseaux. Pourquoi se focaliser sur l'IHU Marseille plutôt que sur le Lancet Gate?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's asking, like, why didn't I focus on the millions of other papers that have been published with fraudulent results? I am focusing on as many papers as I can. The LancetGate paper got retracted very quickly, and it would not have been visible for me to see that it was fraudulent. So it looked like, for me, like a legitimate data set. And so I can only detect certain types of fraud by just looking at these papers. So I don't think I would have spotted the fraud in that paper. I did actually find a potential paper, a potential figure with image problems by one of the authors of the Surgery Sphere paper. And so I did find some evidence of perhaps science misconduct in their papers, but not in the LancetGate paper itself. I don't think I can be blamed for not catching, like, I'm not Superwoman. It's not like any fraudulent paper I could detect the fraud in. I can only detect it if it's visible, and I would only detect the tip of the iceberg. I cannot see underwater. And so I don't, I'm not a perfect person. I would not have caught that. So that's, I guess, a well-done fraud, and I didn't see it.
Et la dernière question de ces gens qui sont très obsédés par une dimension du problème et imaginent que les autres en face l'ignorent, c'est: les conflits d'intérêts sont-ils un problème pour vous?
Well, I have raised concerns about papers that might have conflicts of interest. For example, a paper that talked about a particular enzyme, but the authors are patent holders on, so they have written a patent that is about this exact enzyme, but it's not disclosed in the paper. And so I feel that that's a potential conflict of interest. But if the question is, do I have conflict of interest? I'm not being paid by big pharma, as some people suspect. I am working sometimes for publishers and institutions, like universities. And I yeah, I try to disclose that as best as I can. I cannot always disclose which universities, because some of these cases are so personal that it would immediately tell the world which particular case I have been working on. And so I disclose it as best as I can, but I'm, it's never enough. Whatever I will say, people will say I still have conflicts of interest that I didn't disclose. I've written a whole page about that, and that's part of my Twitter bio, so you can click on that. And those are the disclosures I have openly written about. But people still ask me that question over and over again.
Yes, of course.
I guess.
Mais au-delà de ça, je pense que ce qu'ils veulent dire, c'est: êtes-vous ouverte à l'hypothèse que des gens avaient l'intention de discréditer, de tuer l'hydroxychloroquine pour de mauvaises raisons?
I can imagine that one pharmaceutical company wants to promote their own product, and that they try to discredit it. I mean, the same way that the whole fan base of Raoult is trying to discredit me. I mean, that's happening in the open. Like I cannot rule that out, but I was definitely not part of that. I'm not being paid by anybody to discredit Raoult specifically. And it's funny how people think I'm, because I've also focused on a case in China where there was a famous immunologist in China, and then people were like, why are you focusing on him only? Why are you not focusing on people from Europe? And then whoever I choose to criticize at that moment, those people tend to think I'm just focusing on them. And it's funny in a way, because I'm just not focusing on them at all. But I guess they're very vain and they like to think that.
Revenons à la polémique actuelle autour de Didier Raoult. Quelle suite peut-on attendre des soupçons de fraude et des accusations de harcèlement?
And now, what can we expect?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to expect. It's I don't even know what's in the complaint. So there apparently has been a complaint filed against me. I only know the three things that I'm accused of: so the harassment and the blackmailing and extortion. But I'm not sure what's in that complaint at all in terms of evidence or other claims they make. So I have not been officially notified that there was a complaint filed against me. It's a very strange situation. Like, I guess I'm being suspected of something, but I'm not quite sure of what. And nobody officially told me, other than, you know, a tweet and a video on François, where it was announced that a complaint has been filed against me. But I honestly have not heard anything official, and I cannot defend myself because I don't know what's in it. So it's a very strange situation for me, and I'll just wait and see what happens. And maybe I will never hear something again, because it seems a claim that is not based on any evidence. And so I hope the legal system in France is so that the prosecutor will also realize there's no evidence against me. But I don't know what I need to expect, and I don't know how long it will take. And it seemed a bit unfair to accuse somebody but not tell them what they're accused of.
Yeah. And
Et à propos de Raoult et de Liège-sur-Marseille, quelle réaction peut-on attendre de la part du monde de la recherche, des ministères, des journaux scientifiques? Vous-même, qu'espérez-vous de leur part aujourd'hui et dans les mois qui arrivent?
I'm not sure what to expect. It seems that France seems to be very different in the way that it handles this case than I would have expected in any other country. But I hope that more and more official institutions will denounce the action of Raoult and will stand with me in saying, like, these are scientific discussions that should not be fought in the legal arena. And you know, why doesn't he answer the question? Like, you know, prove me wrong, and why is he engaging in this apparent harassment of me, actually, and instead of, again, answering these questions? And I hope more and more institutions will denounce that. Will say this is not right, and Raoult is just not handling this in a professional way. He should fight this again. Like I keep on repeating myself, but he should answer these questions and not threaten the person who's raising these questions.
Question plus difficile, j'en suis désolé. Regrettez-vous d'avoir utilisé le terme néocolonialisme dans votre critique, ce qui offre à Raoult l'opportunité de vous reprocher d'être subjective, voire polémique, dans votre démarche? Était-ce une erreur de votre part?
No, it wasn't. I don't regret it. I did not use the term neocolonism. I used the term neocolonial science, which even has a Wikipedia entry. So it's a well-defined concept. And I feel that his papers were seem to fit in that concept of a researcher from a rich country going to a more poor country, doing some research there, and then taking the results back and publishing them without involving somebody from that country. It's like that has a specific term. I never accused Raoult himself of being a neo-colonist, as he claims. Like he is twisting the truth a little bit there, because I said this paper could be interpreted as neo-colonial science. I do not regret that for a minute, no, because I do feel it fits that bill. And he could have replied by saying, yes, we offered this research to people in the Congo, and nobody wanted to be an author, or something like that. Instead, he's claiming I'm harassing him or insulting him. But he should then prove, if he claims I'm making a wrong claim, he should prove that he gave researchers in that country a chance to be a part of that paper. And I have not seen any proof of that yet.
L'université Aix-Marseille a ordonné une enquête sur les travaux de Didier Raoult. Raoult prétend que c'est à sa demande. Savez-vous si c'est vrai?
I don't know if that's true. I don't know how objective such a research would be, because it seems that if you investigate your own case, you would always agree with yourself. So it doesn't seem to be very objective. And I have not seen the outcome yet. Raoult himself has been president of the HMU, so it doesn't seem like he's the right person to investigate his own papers.
Vous auriez préféré que soient mandatés des experts indépendants? Mais comment obtenir cela?
I feel that most of the issues I've raised are visible from the papers itself. You don't need to actually look at do a very detailed investigation to see the potential problems here. But I do feel that such a investigation should be done by an independent institution. So not HMU, not IHU, but like a French, maybe a national organization. I would not know the French organization of science well enough to know which institution that should be, but I feel there should be a more independent investigation. And most of these cases are just visible by looking at these papers. But it should be somebody who's not directly connected or in favor or against Raoult. Like, it should be somebody independent, and it should not be his own institution.
J'ai peut-être la réponse, mais il ne faudra pas hésiter à me corriger dans les commentaires. Nous avons en France le Haut Conseil de l'évaluation de la recherche et de l'enseignement supérieur, qui est censé veiller sur l'intégrité scientifique. C'est donc son travail, et je ne sais pas si ce travail est bel et bien fait dans l'affaire qui concerne Marseille.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why. I mean, these cases, again, have been raised about a year ago. So some of these cases are relatively fresh. You would think that, a year ago is still, in scientific investigations, is still a very short time. So I've raised my concerns with journal editors. I've also sent an email to HMU, but they never replied to me. So it doesn't seem that they are very willing to investigate these cases themselves. And you would hope that somebody else would investigate this. But these cases will take a long time, so I don't expect anything fast to come out of these things. But there's so many conflicts of interest where Raoult published in papers he seemed to have set up himself, or at least is very involved in the editorial board. And so these are things that show that this is not, that peer review process might have been not as objective as one would have hoped. And so he's involved in a lot of these constructions where he seems to have a lot of influence. So I'm not sure how far his influence reaches all over France, but like it should be somebody who's not connected to him and not afraid of him either, because this is a person who likes to sue other people if they disagree with him. And so it needs to be somebody who's not afraid to take a stance. And there seems to be very few people who have shown that courage as of now.
Je suis sûr qu'il y a des gens. Je veux le croire.
We want to believe that, yes.
Pour terminer, avez-vous des conseils, des petits trucs à donner au public, aux gens qui ne veulent pas être abusés par de mauvais articles scientifiques, par des revues prédatrices, et qui veulent savoir comment faire confiance à ceux qui lisent? Quelles questions devons-nous avoir à l'esprit?
Well, it's hard to know if a paper is a good paper in most of the cases. Like, I still think, I want to think that most science papers are trustworthy. Like, they might have errors. All science papers have errors. Like, we all make small mistakes. And we should still trust in each other, but trust but verified. Like, even if you're a very young researcher with not a lot of scientific credit yet, you are allowed to raise questions. You are allowed to be critical. If you're a smart person and you see a potential problem in a paper, you should raise it just for the sake of science as a whole. And don't be intimidated by the bullies, the scientific bullies of this world. Raise those questions, but remain polite and objective. But raise them. Don't be afraid. And science is and should be self-correcting and trustworthy. And if you raise concerns, you're part of that. And that is how science should be. And we should, we should still believe in science, and we should still, because science is about finding the truth. That is what science is. Science is about doing experiments, reporting about what you found, and reporting it to others so that they can build upon your work. And if you're cheating, you're misusing that system. So science should be about finding the truth, not about bullying, not about reporting fraudulent results. And yeah, as a young scientist, it's not normal that scientists are fraudulent. Don't think that. Like, think honest and be as courageous as you can. And it might actually damage your own career. And this is the hard thing I'm always fighting with, because I want people to be courageous, but I don't want people to ruin their own career as well. And unfortunately, there are still many structures in academia that are so hierarchical that they will powerful people can break other people's career. And I really hope we can find better ways of dealing with this injustice and just make science a better place again, because it's science is the only way we can face the problems of the world, the pandemics and the climate change. It needs to come from science, and science is so important in my opinion, but it should be about finding the truth. That's for me the most important thing.
Merci pour cette réponse. Un mot de la fin en français?
Maybe in French, if you want to.
No, my French is not good enough. I would be making a fool of myself. No, I just hope I still hope that there can be a polite scientific discussions about the problems I've raised. I hope this will not come to a legal case. And I just hope that we can all work together and making science better and solve the problems of the COVID-19 epidemic without insulting and without harassing anybody.
Faisons de la science proprement.
Right.
Merci, Dr Bik, pour votre temps, pour votre dévouement à ce travail qui réclame du caractère, du courage et de la détermination. Nous vous en sommes reconnaissants.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.